Welcome to the Enterpriser podcast, brought to you by Peninsula, our official human resources sponsor. And today we have Mark Goldhar. Mark, how are you today?
I'm doing great today. Nice to be here.
Great. Yeah, thanks for joining us. Mark is a serial entrepreneur. He is the co-founder of Healing Maps, which is produces content and information to those whose ailments are treated with psychedelic-based alternative medicine. Mark is also a board member of Pathway Health, a founding shareholder of the Well Creative Consultants, CEO of Gen X Holdings, the co-founder of Star Wellness. He's on the board and a founding shareholder of Site 2020, Pocket Finance, and others. So, Mark, maybe you could kind of, like we were talking about a minute ago,
Yeah.
you've got an incredible sort of profile. Maybe you could sum up a little bit more about what it is that you're working on right now for us.
Yeah. I'm an accountant by trade. Ended up starting in Halifax, but about 10 years ago, got into the venture building space. And over the last decade, built 15 ventures and have sold four of them.
That's incredible.
Currently, I'm working on a lot of companies in the mental health and wellness space. People like to call it psychedelics. There is new drugs called psychedelics coming to the market, but I actually really focus on the mental health and wellness space, along with pain management. So in that area, I mean, I have four companies I've been involved with already. One was called SciTech. It was a roll-up of clinics in Illinois focusing on ketamine-assisted therapy for drug-resistant depression. We ended up selling that to a public company right in the middle of COVID. Times were really good about a year and a half ago in the psychedelic capital market space. Because of that, I ended up starting a couple other ones too, and Healing Maps was one of them. Just from doing the research in SciTech, we realized, my business partner in that one, his name's Corey Jones, we realized that there was a real opportunity in a nascent market to educate people. And it wasn't me that was doing the education. I'm an accountant, finance guy. It was my business partner.
Yeah.
And as you'll find out with all of my stories, I have very strong business partners. I'm good at one thing, they're good at the other.
Hmm.
Those partnerships allow the businesses to be created. And we use, actually, I'm going to quote somebody who is an actual Halifax local guy. Wayne Crawley taught me something a long time ago, and he said creative abrasion is very useful in building companies. So what that really means is everybody can come with their own opinion, but you have to have respect for the other party to get through all the problems of starting companies. So I started Healing Maps
Creative
about a year and a
abrasion.
half
I like
ago.
that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, but I started Healing Maps about a year and a half ago, and really it was to educate, as you mentioned at the beginning, it was to educate the population around a stigmatized industry. The stigmatized industry is
Hmm.
psychedelics, and people are scared of these drugs. Meanwhile, they'll go to the doctor and take SSRIs. So really, the way I look at this is all
Yeah.
these are drugs. And when someone takes a drug from a doctor, it could be LSD, it could be psilocybin, it could be SSRIs. What really needs to be there is the access to those medications, so that people have the ability to
Hmm.
get the medications that heal the ailments that they have. And right now, it's only been recently that they've started opening up that market. So Healing Maps is really there to destigmatize. We're sort of the Yelp for the ketamine service right now too. So we have a directory service with
Okay.
1,500 ketamine clinics all through the U.S. And we're now expanding that into psychedelic retreat centers with other molecules, as long as it's legal in the jurisdiction where they're doing it. So one of my
Hmm.
other companies that came out of the education in there was a company called Star Wellness. And that was a Brazilian-based medical health facility. We started off with ibogaine in hospital, and ibogaine is one of those psychedelic plants that people don't
Okay.
know very much about, but it's used for addiction.
Hmm.
And then from there, we ended up opening up ketamine clinics, and we're going to try and be the largest psychiatric mental health wellness company in Brazil, hopefully in the next couple of years. So we have some big ambitions down there. And then the last one I got
Yeah,
into
incredible.
is one other thing, which is the real estate side. And most people think that this business is going to be primarily driven by doctors, but a lot of the future is going to be driven by therapists. Okay, doctors can go to a
Hmm.
bank and get financing. Therapists have a lot more difficulty getting that financing. So we're starting to set up a REIT right now
Yeah.
called the Healing REIT, which will allow therapists to come to us. We can buy their building, set up the facility, and they just lease it back from us. And so those are the four
Okay.
projects in psychedelics. Sorry for the long intro there.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, that's cool. I mean, in just your intro, I learned several things aside from the creative abrasion, which I wrote down because I really like that. So I didn't realize that there. So there are clinics. I didn't realize, I guess, how far the psychedelic industry had come to the point where I knew that people once certain drugs became legalized, I knew that people were starting to use them through their own research. But it's now come to a point where there's, like you said, there's clinics and there's retreats and stuff like that. So. And this is from my own, just from my own personal curiosity. I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I've and stemming from mental health issues, and so for the 6 or 7 years, I've been going to therapy and taking medications prescribed by the doctor and stuff like that. So how are psychedelics used? How are they? How is that showing promise in with in comparison to, say, SSRIs, and which I take personally? How are they showing promise? What are the differences that you can tell us
So
about?
the first caveat I'm going to say is I'm not a doctor. Okay, so the first caveat is everything I've learned.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, that's
yeah. I
fine.
just want to make it very clear. So, but I have read a
Yeah.
lot of the studies. I have been in touch with a lot of the doctors. In particular, if you're talking about alcohol addiction, there's a company in the UK called Awaken Clinics, run by Ben Cessna, and they focused on a protocol using psychedelics for alcohol addiction. And they're now trying to
Hmm.
partner with North American clinics to bring their product line to North America and starting to help people. But maybe it would be good to let me just do a little bit of a history of where the drugs are, because that would probably be helpful as well. So let me start
Yeah.
off quickly by saying
Totally. Yeah.
it was around, I think, 2017, 2018 in the United States when it really started moving. And that was because the FDA approved ketamine for off-label use for psychiatric purposes. And what that means is doctors can now use it for mental health issues. And ketamine historically has been a general anesthetic. Everyone thinks it's horse tranquilizer. That's just
Yeah.
the war on drugs, and the crap that comes out of that. That's that wording.
When
But in reality, what it was
in
is
my 20s, when I experimented with it, that's what I was told.
right,
Yeah.
right, yeah, yeah. It's not a horse tranquilizer. It's a general anesthetic that was used in surgery, and it's very safe. And so
Yeah.
they started using it because people would go under general anesthetic for surgery and come out with no depression for a few weeks afterwards if they had depression. And that link started to show up a lot. And so then they allowed, and again, the United States, they're way more aggressive in the way they bring out new medicines. So the doctors down there went off label, and a bunch of psychiatric doctors and anesthesiologists opened these clinics and started treating people with IV and mainly ketamine. So you go in, you get an IV, they inject you with ketamine, they give you ketamine, you would get into a K-hole, is what the term would be, okay? And then when you come out of it, you'd go into
Yeah. Yeah.
psychotherapy, okay? Not during the K-hole, it was after, because you're too out of it. So afterwards, you would have a series of psychotherapy sessions over a 6-week span, along with other ketamine injections. And what they found out is the efficacy was
Hmm.
amazing. So you're having a ton of people who are
Really?
drug resistant on SSRIs for depression using this. And again, I'm not the protocol doctor, so there's many doctors I go speak to. And the truth is, it's actually way bigger than
Hmm.
people thought. Like, for example, you might not know, we're in Halifax, Nova Scotia today, but on Quinpool Road, there is a clinic that does ketamine, okay? And it's for mental health
Really?
purposes. Okay, and
Yeah.
there's a bit of a gatekeeper issue in Canada right now, and the main issue is you have to have a psychiatrist and your doctor sign off that you need to go for this alternative therapy because SSRIs haven't worked for you. Which means if
Hmm.
you want to take this therapy, you have to try SSRIs first. Which for me is
Yeah.
which for me is just a little bit of an issue because it's not giving the patient and the doctor the choice. It makes the doctor force the patient to take a pill before they can use this as an alternative medicine. But this is all so
Interesting.
brand new, and my
Hmm.
background coming from the cannabis space is we just have to be patient because these systems and these bureaucracies take time, and it's moving really quick for them, really slow for us, right? If you look at it
Hmm.
that way, like
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I've been in the space for 4 years. I'm a true believer in the space and the science behind it and what it does for people. And I'm just talking about ketamine right now. But, psilocybin's going the same way, MDMA's coming, LSD, 5-MeO, all of these drugs, and they all have specific ailments that they work very well for, okay? And then
Hmm.
specific things that they don't work great for. And again, this is where the doctor-patient relationship and the doctor education around these drugs needs to happen over the next number of years.
Right.
So that's sort of like where I would sort of place the industry today, but it's way bigger than what people think. And it's not, this is a medical business. So like this is the other thing
Hmm.
I want people to understand. Because a lot of people talk about psychedelics like cannabis. Okay, and I do come from the
Hmm.
cannabis space, but we'll leave that for today. But
Yep.
cannabis was always said to be a medical product, but in reality, everybody was hiding it as a recreational product. Okay. And
Yeah,
what
yeah.
happened in the industry was a whole bunch of companies said they were medical, and as soon as recreational came, bang, we're wreck. In the psychedelic
Yeah.
space, I believe there's going to be way more controls around that. Most of the people in
Hmm.
the space right now are very focused on the medical attributions of this. Almost all of
Hmm.
the reason why these drugs are being used is because of medical studies and science that's happening. It's not based on anecdotal evidence anymore. So that's the
Right.
main differences between the space. So this group of drugs is really just drug development in a traditional pharma business, unlike
Right.
cannabis, which is not that way because it's built its own industry outside of it. But that's my own
I
personal
see. I see.
opinion. Um,
Yeah. And I think that I think that's and I mean even I'm a victim of it too because the drugs that you had mentioned are all drugs that in my 20s I'd experimented with and now and I've been to rehab and so when and I've met people who have been in rehab because of addictions to those drugs, right? And so there is a big stigma around it, right? Like, I mean, it's even for me um, to think about the fact that mental health issues, that I've had or that friends have had, could be treated with it. I remember having a discussion years ago with a friend of mine who was treating his own mental health with psilocybin. And he was also somebody who was kind of there for me to talk to because I was still in active addiction at the
mhm.
time. And he was like, you should really try psilocybin. And I was like, man, I'm already addicted to like to the worst drug there is. I can't like try another one, right? But that's not really the case. But it has to be done, I guess, in a controlled
It
way.
is.
Um,
Um,
and with,
sorry to
Go
interrupt there,
ahead.
but the one thing I want to say is most of these ketamine is different than the other ones I've talked about because ketamine is not a psychedelic. Okay,
Hmm.
that one is a dissociative. Okay, so it's a
Okay.
very different substance. It's not an organic substance. It doesn't come from a plant,
Hmm.
and so that substance in particular is a little different than the other ones. The other substances in general are not addictive. They're actually so like the psychedelic substances like ayahuasca and ibogaine, they're actually anti-addictive. And when you start taking them, you're going to find out even psilocybin would have the same anti-addictive qualities, unlike the nicotine and alcohol and all of that stuff, which is highly addictive.
Yeah.
So again, education's really one of our primary drivers on why I got into the space is because of lack of
Hmm.
even people like yourself who are open to it. It's hard to find information, and that's where healing Woods came in
Yeah.
really big time.
I see. Okay, so a question for you, and if this is actually the same friend, I went to him when I found out that we were going to be doing an interview. He's been interested in the psychedelics industry as business for years, and so I'm asking for him, and I'm asking for a lot of people who are probably going to be listening. For those interested in getting into the space, what are the biggest areas right now that need innovation or improvement that entrepreneurs could get involved
Well,
in?
going back to what the space is, so this is a medical space. It's going to
Hmm.
be clinic driven or retreat driven with doctors or therapists involved. Okay. I've heard a number of people say they want to start growing psilocybin and psilocybin like grow operations. I do not think that is a great opportunity. I think you're going to
No.
end up in a situation where the manufacturing of this is not like cannabis; it's much different. And how much psilocybin in the world do you actually need? So this is you start running into capacity issues. Where I see there being really big opportunities is sometime in 2023, 2024, there's a company called MAPS, which is a multidisciplinary association of psychedelic medicine. And they have been working for the last 30 years to legalize MDMA for PTSD. And this is going to become legal this year, okay? The opportunity that really
Okay.
pops up is you have 16 to 18,000 clinics that these guys want to build out over the next 3 to 5 years
Wow.
while they still have a patent in place. So, what's the opportunity? Well, the opportunity is to start, becoming a therapist, working through that component of it, opening up clinics around MDMA. By the way, I'm saying MDMA, psilocybin's happening at the same time. As of right now, on
Okay.
Healing Maps, we actually have a collection group basically looking for people who want to start psilocybin retreats in Oregon, where it's legal. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where also the REIT started as well too, is looking at the West Coast as they start creating these retreat centers. So all of this stuff is
Mm-hmm.
coming to a sort of a head where the opportunity is around, for me, I see around clinics. The other big opportunity people have been spending a lot of time on is drug discovery. For me, that's a very difficult path. And for people who are listening that don't know what that means from a business perspective is you need to raise somewhere between 30 and 70 million dollars to take a new drug from the
Mm-hmm.
idea all the way through. A lot of,
Oh,
yeah,
really? Okay.
and this is where there's a lot of people who have started, but there's also areas that haven't been started very much. I haven't heard very much research being done in the mescaline area and other drugs. But I do think, therapists, clinics, and then the big opportunity for me is real estate. Drug discovery
Mm-hmm.
outside of this is very scary to me because it's like if you go into the mining space, same idea, right? You're going to put tens of millions of dollars behind one thing, and it's a very binary decision at some point that you actually don't have control, right? Because you have to go through the medical
Yeah.
studies. And so in the phase three final study, you could have spent 20 to 30 million dollars already and in the end not get what you want and end up with nothing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my concern specifically around this industry, and I don't want the drug development to stop, but this is different than other drug development because primarily the issue you're running into is generics are going to come to market first. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
all the people who are doing like compounds, synthetics, and all of that stuff have to go through the 5 to 7 year process to get a full drug. In the meantime,
Mm-hmm.
psilocybin's coming to market, ketamine's on market, MDMA's coming to market in their original form, not modified.
Yeah.
None of those have real long patents. 5 to 7 year patents is really where they sort of sit because they're not being rediscovered. So at the end of the day, what you're running into is the drug discovery path is going to have generics. They're going to have to be better than. Plus, you have all of the competition of everybody piling on. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
drug discovery. Some people are going to be huge winners because these drugs work, and some of these synthetics are going to be better than the analogs or better than the generics. Okay, so I
Mm-hmm.
think at the end of the day, when you get into this, the opportunity for small business is in the clinic retreat side. I think the recreational side, I have a hard time recommending anybody go recreational in terms of mushrooms or anything
Yeah.
like that. I mean, it's drug dealing. It's still illegal,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there is always risks around that. I have no personal issue with anybody who deals drugs. I've bought from people like that. And I've smoked them before. I've done all that stuff.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when I get down to
Yeah.
it, the business model around an illegal business doesn't work for me.
No. No.
So for me, that's where I see the opportunities is on the medical clinic side. There has been 4 or 5 years of real development in the space already. So you're not coming in, even if
Mm-hmm.
it might be new to you, it's not new to the industry. And the industry does
Right.
exist. So, yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier that the pandemic had affected the industry. I wanted you to, can you kind of dive into that a little bit more? I'm kind of interested to hear how the pandemic affected the industry.
It affected me personally in the industry in the sense that I started in this industry building a company called SciTech, which I mentioned at the beginning was a roll-up of clinics in Illinois. Well, it didn't start that way.
Yeah.
It actually started off initially as a conference that we were going to run out of Tel Aviv at the beginning of COVID.
Okay.
So we raised our money
Yeah.
in February. We raised about $500,000 from investors, and we were going to run a psychedelic conference and then an incubator for the industry in Israel. So we put our down payment
Mm-hmm.
on a hotel, and COVID hit.
Yeah.
And so we had money in the bank, and we had to figure out what we were going to do. And we were a physical conference company. And we ended up switching it over to a digital conference company, not knowing that digital conferences don't make money. But what it
No.
did do is it put us right at the center of the industry because we were there at the beginning. So we got to invite all the major players to speak at our conferences and our webinars and all that stuff. So I got to, we got to meet Rick Doblin, who runs Maps, and Matt Johnson and David Nutt and all these big names in the space. And they came in, and that's where we started seeing the research. And that's when I started really believing in, oh my God, there's really something here. Like, it's not just a bunch of guys who like to do drugs hanging out. Which,
Yeah.
no issue on that, but it's not the business you want to invest into. So
Right, yeah.
we started looking at the space, understanding there's opportunities there. And then we started trying to figure out how the hell do you make money in this space? Because this is the biggest issue. Everyone starts businesses and they're like, oh, this is really cool. Psychedelics is a really cool industry. It's new. It's fun. It's drugs. Like, let's go do it. Let's raise some money. And then you have to figure out how to make money in it. Like, who's paying you for this stuff? And if you're not a doctor, who's going to pay you anything for anything, right?
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, we realized as we got into the space, let's take a look at buying the doctor's offices. And it wasn't something we did in Canada because the Canadian medical system, privatized clinics in Canada don't make a lot of sense because of our system up here. In the United States, which is a little more broken than ours, there's a big profit component to it. So you can buy doctors' offices and make an economic return once the doctor's paid, which you can't really do in Canada. Okay.
Okay.
So that was a big COVID made that happen. Okay, because we went from being a physical conference and we pivoted within 18 months of starting that business pivoted 3 times and then sold it to a public company for $21 million.
That's incredible.
So that's the sort of thing that happened. And the other major thing that happened in this space in terms of COVID was telemedicine. Okay, so now the big component of psychedelics is you have to you mentioned it earlier. You knew a bunch of people that did these drugs, and they weren't the most. They weren't all. They didn't turn out to be the best people in the world because they ended up being on drugs,
No.
right? They were.
We met at rehab.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
these drugs
Yeah.
alone aren't the answer. Okay, it's drugs
Yeah.
plus psychotherapy. And what ended up happening, which was a huge shift, is on COVID, everyone started doing this. Like going online, having these conversations, not being afraid of having therapy online based on a video chat. And that's a big component to allowing people to have psychedelic retreats and psychedelic treatment. Because let's just say you go down to Brazil or you go down to one of these other places in Mexico to go in a retreat. The aftercare component, how do you do that? Well, now you have a digital health system. And that allows people to continue to do the aftercare component to make sure they stay on the right track after they've had these treatments. And maybe I didn't even explain this, why the treatments work. Overall, all of these psychedelic drugs work in similar type ways, and I'm going to butcher the science. So please, if you're interested, go look on Healing Maps for all the science behind it, because I'm not the guy to do it. But it opens up your neuroplasticity. So really, it's like your defenses, your subconscious defenses disappear, which allows a lot of the trauma that happened in your life to come to the surface. Okay, and when that trauma comes to the surface, it's much easier to work with. Okay, so a lot of these drugs allow that to happen. And with the psychotherapy, they allow them to deal with it, handle it, put mechanisms in place to handle it. And it goes away over time once you've sort of dealt with the fear of dealing with the trauma. Okay, and each person would go through their own trauma journey. And there's tons of companies that are trying to help people go through that journey. But that's sort of the general reason why these drugs work. But there's tons of science behind why they work. Not that I can explain it today. But yeah.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Interesting. You mentioned that you had been part of a physical conference company right at the start of 2020. So up until 2020, Enterpriser was called the Entrepreneurial Development Conference and Expo, and it was me and some other individuals who were putting on this event. We did it, across Canada. We had done it twice in Halifax, and we were just gearing up for our third show in Halifax, and it was I would call it nothing short of a miracle. We had just started collecting sponsor money. The tickets weren't on sale yet. The number of deposits we had made was pretty minimal. If the pandemic had hit and had shut everything down, even a month later, like and we would have been we would have been broke, right? Because we would have put all the money in advertising and ticket sales. We would have had to refund so much money. It would have been unbelievable. But yeah, so we thought about getting into the digital events. And it's exactly what you said. You said that no one realized that digital events don't make any money. And that's because one of the biggest things is sponsors don't really. I mean, they don't want to get involved in the same way that they would get involved with an in-person event because they're not going to be able to turn business, right? I mean, the getting ROI is the biggest thing. But that gave us the ability. It helped. It helped me realize that we needed to pivot as well, and really what I needed to do was that we added the magazine, we added the podcast, so that we had additional revenue streams for our
Well, it's
sponsors.
about creating product for your sponsors, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly. That's what it's all about.
and it doesn't make a difference what industry you're in, right? You always have to have a product that you
Yeah.
can sell. And that's yeah. I fully get the conference side. That's a very
Yeah.
tough business to pull off on a good day.
Yeah, yeah. It is. Even especially in a smaller community like this. However, I will say this. So our first show was so successful in 2016 that a couple of our sponsors immediately said, "You guys need to do this like across Canada. Like you guys know what you're doing. Let's do this. We'll sponsor you any city you go to." And so we did. But there was no show that I enjoyed doing as much as I enjoyed doing the shows in Atlantic Canada. There's just a different feeling and a different community. And so after the pandemic, and I was also learning more about myself as an entrepreneur. And one of the things that I had said is I'm just not doing anything that doesn't make me happy anymore. I've been an entrepreneur my entire life, and sometimes I've got involved in businesses that were that I just didn't like it, but I did it anyway because it was a good investment or whatever. But I don't do that anymore. Like if it doesn't make me smile, then I'm not doing it. So I said, well, if we're going to do these events again, we're doing them in Atlantic Canada, and we're going to stay in Atlantic Canada because there's just a different feeling here. The communities are different; they're tighter knit. The people, in my opinion, are a whole heck of a lot cooler. So,
Well,
this is the only place we're doing it now is Halifax for Atlantic Canada.
the one thing I wish for
Um,
Atlantic Canada though, because I mean I've done a lot of business in Atlantic Canada. A lot of my original startups were Atlantic Canadian startups, but the world has
yep.
become a much smaller place. And Atlantic Canadians generally don't like to go outside of their comfort zone. So I
Yeah.
really, like, out of what you're doing, I hope there's a number of entrepreneurs that go out there and take the risk. And the risk is really just going to conferences outside of Atlantic Canada. Leave the area. And if you're starting a business, especially an Atlantic Canadian business, understand that the United States is actually a great market to go to earlier, okay? Because they're way more apt to starting to use technology and adopting new ideas way quicker than in Canada. So you can build your business here, and a good story that I have is around the creation of Site 2020, which is not psychedelics, but it's an Atlantic Canadian homegrown
Yeah.
company. Started it with a co-founder, well, he's the main founder, Mitch Holohan, and he's grown it to 325 people. We have operations active in 5 different states, and he's built this all from Atlantic Canada. But a lot of the board recommended early on not focusing on doing sales in Atlantic Canada. Build your business here, sell elsewhere, because the sales side here is much tougher. So just across the board, we
Yeah.
found that. But I mean, out of what you're doing with the enterpriser in the conference, I really hope people take risk, because that's the thing people don't
Yeah.
understand. If a lot of times, I mean, I deal with risk. That's all I do. That's what I tell people. All I do is deal with risk, right? And I take all the
Yeah.
risk. I take all the early stage risk. I take all of the growth risk, all of the time risk, all of that stuff. A lot of people don't want to take the risk because they feel they're going to lose, you know, some job or something along those lines that's keeping them where they are. Complacency is the biggest risk. This is the thing I want to tell people.
Yeah.
If you're complacent in your job and you're making your 70, 80,000 a year and you hate what you're doing, you hate all that stuff, you need to go out there and just take a risk, because the risk is you're going to be there in 20 years and have hated your whole life. And so what I tell people very clearly is it's time to take risks here. And by the way, everyone's noticing Atlantic Canada right now. I mean, look at Halifax.
I
20,000 new
know.
people living in Halifax. And these are people coming here to build, right? So it's real time that you can actually use this network, especially the immigration network too, to expand your networks locally for whatever you're starting and expand them globally.
Hmm.
And I've been able to do
Hmm.
that with the businesses I've started. I've been all over the world. And all of my connections started off in Halifax. So there's real opportunities to
Hmm.
do that. And people need to take the risks to do it. Um, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I very, very clearly remember the transitional period when I went from, I was really young when I did it, but so I guess I didn't have as many responsibilities. I didn't have kids when I, took the jump into working for myself, but it was terrifying. But the outcome is exactly what you said. Is the risk is actually really, really high. It's am I going to be there in 20 years still working for somebody else and absolutely hating my life, and that's not something that I think that I would never be able to go back to doing that, and I think that once people are able to take that risk, um, the amount of happiness. I'm a huge supporter in just maintaining as much happiness and serenity as you can possibly maintain in your life, and sometimes in order for me to have gotten to that really was taking massive risk in the beginning, but
Oh,
the just the happiness in itself is tenfold more, so it was worth the risk in
well,
the
the
end.
way I got into this, I didn't even mention at the beginning, but the way I got into this is I was working at Grant Thornton, which is a great firm. If you ever want to be an
Hmm.
accountant and learn, that was a great firm for me to learn at.
Yeah.
I was there for 8 years on and off. Um, but when I left that firm, I had my second child being born. Okay, I was in the process of a marital breakdown as well, and I quit my
Hmm.
job. That was sort of, I could say, partnership track going in Grant Thornton to take equity in a drug dealer who was a cannabis guy, and I did that all within a 3 week period. Moved into my basement, had the second kid, quit my job, and took equity in a drug dealer, and
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
terrifying. Absolutely, I was 33 years old, so like I had responsibilities, I had cash flow, I had a house, um, and um, and at the end of the day, it was the best decisions I've ever made in my life, even though it was all at the same time and all highly stressful. And by the way, I have a good relationship
Hmm.
with my ex, but but that,
Yeah,
yeah,
same
yeah, yeah.
here.
So,
Yeah.
so at the end of the day, it was all the right decisions. The timing of those decisions isn't always opportune. Is that what I would say? But when those
Hmm.
opportunities and decisions need to be made, what I tell people if they're listening to the podcast is make them, even if they're the hard choices. And I think
Hmm.
you've made those hard choices.
Yeah.
I've made those hard choices. I can tell you, 10 years later, I love my life. I love what I'm doing. I help people.
Hmm.
I create businesses. I mean, the best opportunities is like here. The way Healing Mass was actually really started is I'm driving home one day and I hear a big U.S. company going public, and I'm like, oh my god, we can do that. And what do? I phone a buddy up, and like within I don't know 72 hours, three of us are on the phone, and the business is the idea has been formed, and we're gonna go do it.
I
And like,
know.
I don't
Yeah.
know,
I know.
I couldn't tell you how we were going to get to where we are today, but I could tell you we just went forward and jumped into it. And this is another thing people need to understand. Every one of my businesses, even though I've been doing 15 of them, I screwed up in every one of them. Okay, some of them we've screwed up
Hmm.
royally in, but by the way, it's the team you put around you that fixes those problems. And every one of them, I mean, Enterpriser, you guys have run into that with your problems too, right? And you probably have a team
Oh
around you to
yeah.
be able to
Yep.
move you through all of the issues and all of the stages
Hmm.
and all the problems of the business. Um, and it's really building those networks. And this is why, the conferences, going back to that, is really important, and why I like physical conferences versus the other ones, because you actually get in a room with somebody. You can go have, you can go have a coffee, you can have a drink, you can sit down and start knowing people. And then these are always people who are coming to these conferences are people who want to do something, right? So everybody's out there trying to do
Yeah.
their thing.
Exactly.
So like this is where I mean
Yeah.
I'm a huge proponent of taking risk and doing it that way and just going for it. Don't overthink it. Everyone likes to like
Yeah.
I want to have this 20-page business plan where I know everything. Excuse my language. You'll never know everything the day you start. Okay? You can write whatever
Yeah.
business plan you want. Okay? But at the end of the day, you're going to have to be
Hmm.
dynamic in the way you make choices. And that's going back to the SciTech story. If I
Yeah.
wasn't dynamic in that story and we went and spent the money and started this conference in Tel Aviv in the middle of COVID, we would have lost all our money. In the meanwhile, I had a team where we
Hmm.
pivoted 3 times in 18 months and found the business plan that we could sell. And we ended up selling it, 18 months later for a good sum of money. So those are some pieces of advice I would give every entrepreneur is don't overthink things.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, I always tell people if you can find an opportunity that makes you happy and that helps other people, that is a fantastic business opportunity. But just like you said, you have to surround yourself with people who, I find that the best business partners that I've had have been people who have completely different strengths than me and who disagree with a significant amount of things that I say, because I'm a dreamer, really. I'm like, oh, let's do this, and everyone's like, man, come on, like, really. So but if you can find that middle ground, so if you disagree and they disagree and there's a middle ground, that middle ground is usually the best route to take. And so if you've got somebody who's not afraid to disagree on a regular basis, and then you have a good amount of communication and you figure out that middle ground, those have been some of the best ventures that I've had, have been when we're completely at odds, but we both have fantastic skills in certain areas. Yeah,
and mutual respect. Like you can disagree, but you have to disagree respectfully, right?
Yeah, of course,
well,
of course.
There's a lot of that goes down the toilet very quickly. Yeah. That's the problem sometimes, right? So it's really
true. Especially when money is involved.
Well,
yeah,
I always say, like, people like to trade and do all this. Everyone's hunky dory and family and all that stuff while you're doing the pre-seed stuff when you haven't raised any money, you haven't done anything. When there's money on the table, you have to watch your back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah.
So Mark, before we wrap things up, I wanted to ask you what's next for you. What's taking up most of your time right now? If
legitimately, I'm on 11 boards. 9 of those companies I co-founded. A lot of my focus in the next 2 to 3 years, knowing that there could be a recession coming, is stockpiling cash into those businesses that are still burning. The ones that aren't burning, it's using the cash to make good acquisitions. We're into a very unique situation in terms of the economy right now. We could have a whole different podcast on my view of that, but we're into a very different view of the economy right now, with interest rates where they are and inflation where it is. I'm getting these companies ready to buckle down and grow them through this period, and on the back end, looking at selling the companies once we've cleared this hurdle. Literally, the newest thing I'm bringing to market is the REIT, and then other than that, it's just maintaining and growing the other 11. And again, a lot of the stuff I focus on in terms of the mental health space also includes pain management, and that's my involvement with Pathway Health. So my goal there is to integrate pain management and mental health services eventually into one service line. But that's a whole other conversation I can go into.
Right.
But this was great. But yeah, I'm going to be pushing forward on all my projects, raising capital, having fun.
Right. Good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Mark, I really appreciate the chat today. I have personally learned a lot, and I know the people who are listening are going to have learned a lot as well. I look forward to seeing you at the conference, and let's have another chat. We'll connect again in the next coming days just to chat a little bit more about the event. But yeah, thanks very much for joining us today.
I appreciate your time and what you guys are doing. That's why I reached out to you. And if any of your listeners want to know any other information, you can find me on LinkedIn and just reach out that way. I always respond.
Yeah. Is LinkedIn the best way to get a hold of you?
For right now, LinkedIn would be the... LinkedIn or my email, it's mark@goldharinc.com. Those would be the 2 best ways. I monitor both, and I get back to people pretty quickly.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate it. You've been listening to the Enterpriser podcast, which is brought to you by Peninsula, our official HR sponsor.
love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out, maybe it's the chemistry. It's time to break up so I can make a better me. Better believe in your mind, cause it's everything. You can mold, shape, find